Today, we're going to dig into one of history's great, tragic ironies. It's the story of how a desperate attempt to prevent a war actually ended up paving the way for it, all because of two very different leaders on a collision course.
So how can a genuine desire for peace accidentally fuel a war? It seems completely counterintuitive, right? Well, to figure this out, we need to transport ourselves back to the 1930s in Europe. It was an incredibly tense time, and we're going to see how one particular policy, a policy that was supposed to keep the peace, just backfired in the most catastrophic way possible.
So let's set the stage. Picture Europe in the 1930s. It was basically a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And right at the center of it all, you have these two guys, two leaders with completely opposite ideas about where Europe should go. And yeah, they were heading for a collision.
And this slide really gets to the heart of the problem. On one side, you've got Germany, led by Hitler, just full of this aggressive ambition, ready to tear up the rule book. But then you look at France, led by Daladier, and they're coming from a totally different place. They're still haunted, truly haunted by World War I. They lost a whole generation of young men, their land was scarred, and the last thing on earth they wanted was to go through that nightmare all over again. So you have ambition on one side and just paralyzing fear on the other.
Okay, so you might be asking, how did Germany get to be this massive threat? It's a really good question. And to get why France was so afraid, we first have to look at what was happening right next door, at Hitler's unchecked rise.
You see, Hitler didn't just, win an election and start governing. No, he immediately began to systematically tear down Germany's democracy. From the moment he became chancellor in 1933, he used everything he could. We're talking propaganda, intimidation, and literally getting rid of anyone who stood in his way to grab absolute power.
And once he had Germany under his thumb, he started looking outside its borders. First, he annexes Austria. Then, he occupies Czechoslovakia. And you have to understand, these weren't just simple land grabs. This was him openly spitting on the Treaty of Versailles, the agreement that ended World War I and was specifically designed to prevent Germany from doing exactly this. And what did the other European powers do? They pretty much just watched. That inaction sent a huge, dangerous message. Go ahead, you can get away with it.
And what was fueling all of this aggression? It was a really hateful and dangerous ideology. This belief Hitler had in Aryan supremacy, as he called it, became the justification for persecuting Jews, the Roma people, and basically anyone he labeled an enemy of Germany. And this laid the foundation for some of the absolute worst atrocities humanity has ever seen. So, you're France or Britain, and you see this clear and growing danger right on your doorstep. What do? Do you confront him, or do you give him some of what he wants, hoping he'll stop? Well, they chose the second path, a policy that would go down in history with a very infamous name: appeasement. And appeasement is exactly what it sounds like, giving in to Hitler's demands to try and avoid a war. Now, it's so easy for us to look back today and just call it weakness, but you have to put yourself in their shoes. For leaders like Daladier, this was a desperate gamble. They were trying anything, literally anything, to stop Europe from being torn apart by another massive war.
And you can see how it played out over time. It really starts right when Hitler gets into power in 1933. For years, the Allies just keep making these concessions, hoping each one will be the last. The peak of this whole policy was the Munich Agreement in 1938. That's when they basically handed over a piece of Czechoslovakia to Hitler, and in return he promised peace. But that promise? It was completely empty. A year later, he invades Poland, and it was obvious. The gamble had totally, utterly failed.
So this whole strategy, this desperate attempt to keep the peace, it ended up having the exact opposite effect. It wasn't a roadblock for Hitler. It was practically an invitation for more aggression. And the consequences were, well, disastrous.
Yeah, instead of calming Hitler down, appeasement just fed the beast. It sent this crystal clear message that the big powers in Europe weren't really willing to fight back. Every time they gave in, Hitler didn't see it as a generous peace offering. He saw it as a green light to just take more.
And the result of all this? It was swift and it was brutal. That war that Daladier and so many others had tried so hard to avoid was finally here. After Poland was invaded, the dominoes fell fast. And France, one of the great military powers of Europe, was just overrun. It's shocking, but it took only a matter of weeks before they were forced to surrender.
But France's surrender wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a deep, painful split inside the country itself. The nation was literally torn in two over what to do next.
So you ended up with this really strange situation. On one side, you had General Pétain, who stayed in France and led what was called Vichy France, basically a puppet government that worked with the Nazis. But then you had General de Gaulle. He escaped to Great Britain and started the Free French Forces, promising to keep fighting no matter what. So suddenly, you have two different governments, two Frances, both claiming to be the real one.
And all of this brings us back to a huge question that leaders and historians still wrestle with. You hear people talk all the time about the lesson of the 1930s in politics today. But what is the right lesson to learn from all this? When you're facing down an aggressor, where do you draw the line? What's the difference between smart diplomacy and a concession that's just dangerous? There really are no easy answers, are there?